Welcome to Secret Story. Sophie had been disappointed not to have had a little fun with Brian earlier, but she had loved the house. She waited impatiently for Mike to get home. She was glad the Wilsons trusted her with the keys and could not wait to impress Mike with the house. Sophie's mum dropped the twins back home shortly before Mike arrived. Sophie had already changed back into jeans. Do you want to go and see the house? We can take the twins, too. I have the keys. Sophie was surprised at how excited she sounded. Mike complained about the traffic and a headache, and they agreed to go in the morning. Saturday was bright and sunny, and Mike agreed to drive them all as long as they were back for the big game on TV that afternoon. Mike could not help but get excited about the house and moving. The house was better than he expected, though the immaculate large garden worried him a little. All the way home, Sophie and Mike made plans, talked about decorating, and agreed they should move. They also hoped to be in by the end of the month. Just 3 weeks away. Monday came, and Sophie went and told Brian and his wife they would love to move into the house. Brian's wife asked her to call her Mildred and hoped they would be happy. Brian said they could move whenever they wanted to, and Sophie said they hoped to do it by the end of the month. Mildred bustled around, serving tea and delicious homemade cakes. Afterwards, Brian offered to drive Sophie home. On the way, he asked if he could help with the move. Sophie said Mike would try to borrow a van from work and some friends to help with lifting. She said she could get all the boxes she needed from work and thought they would be okay. Brian apologized that he could not come in as he dropped Sophie home. Enjoy these, and thank you again for the chance to move. Bring them back next time you see me. Sophie kissed him on the cheek before she walked to the front door and waved as Brian drove away. On Wednesday afternoon, rent day, Sophie was delighted to see Brian and Geoffrey standing on her doorstep. They followed her into the kitchen, both offering help with her house move. Geoffrey said he could arrange 2 or 3 staff members from the hotel in a 7.5-ton truck with a driver, much better than driving there and back all day in a little van and all that carrying, he said. Sophie asked how much it would cost, and Geoffrey smiled and said he was sure they could work something out. Sophie thanked him and said she would check with Mike this evening and let him know. Sophie smiled to herself, thinking about how much money her arrangement was saving. What would you both like to do today? We have all afternoon, and I am feeling very indebted to you both. Brian put his hand in his pocket. Thank you for these, he said, handing them to Sophie. Sophie knew what she wanted to do. As she had been fantasizing about both men her at the same time. What about another of your stories from university or something sexy and naughty that you have never told Mike? Brian said. Geoffrey nodded in agreement, and they both pulled a kitchen chair out and sat facing Sophie. I can tell you about a bit of a lesbian experience I had. In my second year, I was in a flat shared with 2 other girls. One was a Chinese girl whose wealthy parents were funding her. She was quite studious, and her father forbade her from having any boys in the flat. She did not need to share as her parents paid the whole cost, but she wanted some company. The other girl was also quite studious and very quiet. One weekend, her mum and sister came to visit and stayed over. They borrowed my room, and I went in with Chen in a king-sized bed. I woke up in the night needing the loo to find Chen not quite spooning me, but with one hand on my boob. I got up and went to the bathroom, and when I got back in bed, I laid awake thinking about it. A few minutes later, Chen was almost spooning me again with one hand on my hip. It sounds lovely and beautiful, Geoffrey interrupted, perhaps one for another time. Have you anything a little naughtier? We had quite a few nights in bed together after that, but yes, let me think of something else. Sophie thought for a minute. What about Gay Ray? I think you called him. Geoffrey said, I can tell you about the study group that started in year 1 of politics. There was me, one huge black guy, and 3 other girls. By the start of year 2, only me and the black guy met regularly. Chen would let him come to the flat, as everyone knew him as Gay Ray, and he had no interest in girls. One study evening, I was suffering from a cramp in my feet, so Ray offered me a foot massage. I got some essential oil from the bathroom. I was wearing a long, sleepy t-shirt that came down past my knees and nothing underneath. Ray spent time massaging my feet and was good at it. He then moved up to my calves and lower legs. Sophie lifted her leg onto a chair in front of Brian and Geoffrey and ran her fingers up her shin to demonstrate. Sophie smiled and continued the story. I slouched down on the sofa and relaxed. Ray pushed the bottom of my t-shirt up to mid-thigh and carried on massaging up past my knees. I was getting turned on. I knew Ray was not interested in me, so I decided to be a little daring. He asked me to turn over and moved back as I did. No one had done that to me before. He went slowly and gently. He confessed that he had liked me for a long time but was not attracted to girls. I asked why he was so good at giving oral to girls. He told me a sort of sad tale, to be honest. He told me that when he was growing up, his two older sisters used to make him do it to them and would not let him stop until they were satisfied. He also said they would never pleasure him or let him pleasure himself while they were there. Sophie sat back down, opposite the two men, and smiled. "I've never done anything like that," Brian said. "It was never a thing that I even knew about in my youth." "Don't you believe it?" Geoffrey said quickly. "It has always been a thing. In Greece, it was quite popular to prevent babies. Do you want to come up to the bedroom? I'm changing the sheets later, so we will be comfortable and safe." Sophie led the men to the stairs and walked slowly up ahead of them. She knew they could see up under her skirt. In the bedroom, she helped both men. She hoped her plan for them would work today. Sophie stood, both men soon joined her. Sophie looked around at Geoffrey and smiled as she said, "Look in the bedside drawer, at the top." Geoffrey pulled the drawer open and saw the bottle of lube Sophie had hidden there earlier. Geoffrey needed no second bidding or encouragement. Today, she had them both at the same time, which thrilled her hugely. Brian pushed himself fully inside and held still, asking if Sophie was okay. "Mr. Wilson and Geoffrey have offered help with a van for the move," Sophie said, hearing them talking on the stairs. "They asked to have a quick look and see if a bigger van or truck would be better." A moment later, the two men appeared on the stairs. Brian looked quite red in the face. Geoffrey took over and bluffed his way through sizing a truck. They shook hands with Mike and left with Brian, thanking her for the rent and confirming they were all up to date. Sophie still had the rent money envelope in the kitchen drawer and smiled to herself. She was also relieved that Mike had not come home 10 minutes earlier and caught them all upstairs. "It's kind of Geoffrey to offer to help. I can't get the work van for another couple of weeks, and the move weekend is the playoffs, and no one wants to commit to helping for the day. I don't think we would be able to move by the month's end without his help. Do we know how much it will cost?" Sophie said he had offered that if they could just cover the cost of fuel and the wages of the men for the time they were there, that would be good. Sophie said he didn't think it would even be a couple of $100. Mike went off to change and called down to ask what the mark on the mattress was. Sophie called back up, saying that she had spilled a half cup of coffee while bundling up the washing and had tried to mop it. She told him to leave it to dry, and she would deal with it later. Sophie's heart was banging in her chest, and she could feel her face blushing at the close call.